Kul Chandra Gautam, welcome to Nepali Times Studio. We are honored today to have the author of the new book, Global Citizen from Gulmi. Having reviewed the book for this morning's Nepali Times, I really was struck by the fact that you went from a tiny village in the remotest part of Nepal, one of the most deprived regions, in the 60s, early 60s, to Kathmandu and then on to the United States. It just speaks volumes about your drive and perseverance. But what was it? Was it luck? Was it perseverance? Was it ambition? I mean, how did you go so far?
I've actually pondered about that myself. What is it that took me from where I was to where I ended up being? And there is no straight answer. I think it's a combination of the two. Because I often compare myself compared to many villagers, the boys and girls that grew up with me. Am I much smarter than them, or am I much harder working than them? No. Actually, there are quite a few young boys and girls of my contemporaries who were also hardworking and intelligent. But somehow I say in the book that I'm kind of the winner of a mega lottery. Somehow a series of circumstances made it possible for me to rise up from my humble beginnings. So I would say that it's a combination of partly luck and circumstances, but that alone would not have made it. It also involved a lot of hard work and persistence.
But would you say that a lot of people don't have opportunity, and you didn't have opportunity either, but you created that opportunity yourself?
That's right.
What is the ingredient that's needed for people to actually create opportunity for themselves?
Well, I would say don't give up easily, be persistent, and just be at what you are doing in a persistent way with hope and optimism. And I think that's what was inculcated in me by my parents, particularly my mother, who was herself an illiterate woman, but she encouraged me, but wise. And same thing with my grandfather. He was semi-literate. You know, I was born after he had 4 wives. My father was born very late. He was desperate to have a grandson, and he wanted that grandson to achieve something, to be a learned pandit. And so that inspiration from my grandfather was there for me.
You mentioned that in the book,
exactly.
yes. And also, you also mentioned this incredible fact that Gulmi in that time in your village of Amarapur was so underserved that he taught you the alphabet, the Devanagari alphabet, by writing with a stick on the ground.
Correct.
I mean, you didn't have a blackboard or a copybook or a pencil, you know. So that was that really, I think, really shows in the book how far you've come. Today, your values would maybe be called liberal. And during your college years, after you went to America and overcame culture shock in 1965, you joined anti-Vietnam War protests. What do you think shaped those values? I mean, in the book it comes through very clearly that you are strongly for democracy, for open society, against violence in politics. Was there one teacher, or was there any one inspiration that gave you those values, or what did it come from within?
I think it came mostly from within and based on experience. I was, as you said, quite a leftist kind of student in my young days, and as I recall, there is this expression that says, if you are not attracted to Marxist ideologies when you are below the age of 30, there is something wrong with you. But if you are still attracted to it, after you are 40, there is something wrong with you. So the same thing happened to me. I was very attracted to leftist socialist ideology. I continue to believe in many socialist ideas. But what I saw, remember that was at the time of the Cold War. And what I saw was the tremendous reports of oppression in Stalinist Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and how they used violence to solve problems. I said, that is not the answer. I became much more of a Gandhian than a Marxist, although initially I was attracted to both.
And when you went to Latin America, you saw liberation theology in action. You saw this tremendous inequality and America's presence. And didn't you at that point, even while being a leftist, didn't you sort of identify that violence would be necessary under certain circumstances when there's too much oppression?
Yes, indeed. I mean, I'm not an absolutist that violence under no circumstances is justified. No, I think there are certain causes for which violence may be necessary. The whole anti-colonial movement, and if you are fighting against a Hitler or a terrible dictators, sometimes you have to resist, and that resistance might lead to violence. But those are rare occasions. In the everyday life of most of us, you don't need to resort to violence, that there are non-violent ways of solving problems. And what I find is that changes that are brought through by violent means are temporary. Changes that are brought through peaceful means are lasting. And if you are looking for a lasting solution for a progressive society, you have to go for non-violent.
Let me read you an excerpt from your own book, where precisely you talk to your readers about violence, and you compare Nepal's Maoist movement with the Khmer Rouge, and you knew that firsthand because you were posted in the early years with UNICEF in Phnom Penh, and you had to be evacuated as the Khmer Rouge arrived in the city. So let me read you this chapter. At the height of the Maoist insurgency in Nepal, I could not help but think of the parallels with Cambodia. The Maoists were using language reminiscent of the Khmer Rouge, justifying violence to build a new Nepal, introducing militaristic education and indoctrination in schools, and justifying the liquidation of their class enemies. A senior Maoist ideologue, the highly educated Baburam Bhattarai, who reminds me of Cambodia's Khieu Samphan, even claimed that allegations of Khmer Rouge atrocities were exaggerated and possibly a hoax. And when you met Baburam Bhattarai, did you bring this up with him, and what kind of reaction did you get?
Well, I did. He did not have straightforward answers. Everything was hedged. And he would say, we are for real democracy, authentic democracy. And that sometimes requires violence. And the kind of violence that we tolerate and advocate, he would say, is a counter violence against structural violence, because in society there is deep-rooted violence. And but they would also talk according to their audience. If they talk to the Scandinavians, they would say, the kind of system we want is exactly like in Norway and Sweden.
A welfare state.
Exactly. And then when they talk to their hardcore supporters, wherever they are, then it is the hardcore Marxist, Leninist, Stalinist, Maoist, you might say, Enver Hoxha type of dictatorship.
But this analysis of Nepal's revolution and your conclusions about it seem to have been honed by your experience serving UNICEF in other war zones like Cambodia, Eastern Europe after the Soviet collapse, Latin America, Haiti, and all these areas. I just wonder, is it being a bit too idealistic though? Is there a lot of idealism in this? Whereas in the real world, there are all kinds of contradictions that have to be addressed.
Yes, in the real world there are all kinds of contradictions. But for somebody like me, serving the United Nations, the children of the world, if you don't have a dose of idealism, then you are in the wrong job. You are in the wrong profession. I am inherently, and based on the kind of mission I had to be optimistic. But if you are pessimistic and cynical, how do you work for children? How do you build a new society? There is plenty to be cynical about, but there is also much more to be positive, optimistic about. And in the end, the optimists win, the pessimists lose.
One of the other issues that you seem to feel very strongly about, and this possibly is from your own experience elsewhere in the world, is your abhorrence for identity politics and how that tends to lead a country astray. And you quote Nelson Mandela telling you about Bantustans and how that was the wrong way to go. And you have this very, very interesting paragraph in your book, which I would request you to read, where you sort of defend your opposition to identity politics. This is in page 46, decades later. Yeah.
Shall I read?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Decades later, I witnessed the rise of identity politics in Nepal and around the world. It became clear to me that while the human quest for prosperity is eternal and universal, people's identity changes over time and depends often on the eyes of the beholder. Taking my own case, I noted how some militant advocates of identity politics in Nepal and some foreign anthropologists and diplomats as well tended to place me in a conventional pigeonhole that I was a Pahari, male, Hindu, bound from Western Nepal. That's how they saw my identity. According to their worldview, people like me would be congenitally doomed to defend only the interests of his or her identity groups and incapable of defending the interests of women, Dalits, Madhesis, Janjatis, and other deprived communities. And that is not at all the case, and as I also read here, for me personally, the only identity that matters and that I am proud of are that I am one, a human being, two, a Nepali, and three, a citizen of the world.
Your optimism, is there a real reason for it, or is it part of your personality that you are inherently a positive person?
No, there is a reason for it. If you look at human history, today we complain about many problems, but we do not realize how lucky we are. You know, today many children don't die. They used to die like flies. There were terrible diseases that killed people. You know, in my childhood, I suppose you also got a smallpox vaccine. There is no smallpox has been eradicated from the world. Polio is on the verge of eradication. So many people are going to school. So there is in the history, in the march of human civilization, there's always you move forward, occasionally you move backward, you know, like one step backward, 2 steps or 3 steps forward. And I see that happening in the world and in Nepal. Compared to my childhood, in my village, look at today. In my village, it used to take 5 days walk to go there. Today, I can go there in 1.5 days, drive there. There was no school, there was no health post, there was no drinking water, there were no toilets. We have all of them. And everybody now has got a mobile phone. So things are moving ahead. Yes, there are some new problems that did not exist, but on balance, the world is moving ahead, and Nepal is, I know, destined to move ahead. We have fantastic potential. So it is really based on evidence of the evolution of human civilization.
Yes, you mentioned problems that Nepal faces, and these are structural political problems, despite the fact that we have had elections and a strong government at the moment. And you actually have, in your book, towards the end, you have a prescription to solving some of these problems that somehow democracy doesn't seem to solve. Like, for example, you have elections, and yet you don't have accountability. So you have this really great summary chapter where you prescribe what the future might be. In conclusion, would you like to read that paragraph?
Sure. To fix some of these flaws in Nepali society, we will need nothing short of an ethical renaissance and much greater focus on good governance and a system of accountability, rewarding good performance and with retribution for non-performance. I see this happening with the new generation of Nepalis growing up in an increasingly competitive and globalizing world, and the passing of the current generation of political leaders who grew up in an era of sharp ideological polarization. We are going beyond that now, and our new generation is full of hopes.
Thank you, Kul Chandra Gautam.
Thank you. Thank you indeed.
The book is available from next week. It's being launched in Kathmandu, and hope you get a copy. Thank you very much.